Rajiv Sharma, and Priya Desai, thought they had found the perfect way to make money in London. With forged visas, fake university letters, and a network of accomplices, they built a £250,000 empire. But one tiny mistake, a single email, would unravel everything, turning their dream scheme into a nightmare and catching the attention of UK authorities. This is the story of how ambition, greed, and one careless slip destroyed it all. In 2019, Rajiv Sharma and Priya Desai appeared to be living ordinary lives in East London, blending into a bustling city filled with dreams and opportunity. Rajiv, in his mid-30s, had once worked a modest job in finance, while Priya, slightly younger, ran a small consulting business. But beneath their ordinary facades, they were building something extraordinary. A scheme that promised easy wealth and absolute control. They had discovered a gap in the system, thousands of people desperate to live and work in the UK, willing to pay large sums to bypass the lengthy immigration process. What began as an idea over coffee and late-night brainstorming sessions quickly turned into a full-fledged criminal operation. Their plan was simple in theory, but complex in execution. Rajiv and Priya offered fake sponsorship letters, fraudulent work visas, and forged university admissions to clients who could afford to pay. Each document was crafted to appear completely legitimate, using stolen templates, official-looking stamps, and subtle but convincing alterations. They went to painstaking lengths to mimic government and university paperwork. Clients were reassured with certificates, references, and even fake email confirmations. To anyone trained, these documents looked authentic. The pair cultivated a sense of trust and professionalism, holding themselves out as facilitators who could make dreams come true for the right price. Word of their services spread quickly within certain communities. People came from across London and nearby towns, eager to pay thousands of pounds up front. The cash flowed steadily into their accounts, disguised through small payments and third-party transfers that seemed innocent. Within months, the operation had grown into a £250,000 enterprise. Rajiv and Priya celebrated quietly, confident that their meticulous planning had made them untouchable. The office, a rented space in a modest building, became a hub of controlled chaos. Stacks of files filled every corner, while laptops hummed constantly as they managed clients, produced documents, and tracked payments. Every move was calculated, every detail double-checked. Their confidence was reinforced by the apparent perfection of their scheme. No one seemed to suspect the forgery, and Duo took pride in their sophistication. They even went a step further, offering premium services for higher fees, including expedited processing, additional verification letters, and guidance on passing immigration checks. They created an entire ecosystem around the fraud, complete with detailed guides, phone support, and even fake testimonials to reassure clients. For months, the operation ran smoothly. Rajiv and Priya began to believe that they had outsmarted the system entirely, but their success also bred carelessness. The expansion of their services, the growing client list, and the increasing sums of money created cracks in the structure they had built. Every extra document, every additional client, and every new premium service left a digital footprint. While the duo remained focused on profit, they underestimated the risk of leaving evidence behind. The sense of invincibility blinded them to one simple truth: no criminal operation, no matter how sophisticated it, is completely invisible. Even as they celebrated their growing wealth, a quiet tension lingered. Each forged letter and visa was a gamble. Each new client added risk. The duo had built an empire on deception, but it was fragile, vulnerable to exposure. And as the months passed, the perfect facade of Rajiv and Priya's operation hid the growing danger that even the smallest oversight could shatter everything. What seemed unstoppable in the safety of their office was already teetering on the edge, waiting for the first misstep to trigger a chain reaction that would ultimately destroy it all. The first crack in Rajiv and Priya's seemingly perfect operation came quietly, almost imperceptibly. A young client anxious to start work in London submitted a forged visa to an employer who was unusually attentive to detail. The document looked authentic at first glance, but small inconsistencies, A mismatched stamp, a slightly incorrect date, triggered the employer's suspicion. They reported it to the Home Office, not realizing that their small action would become the first domino in a chain of events that would unravel the entire scheme. Meanwhile, Rajiv and Priya continued to expand their operations, fueled by growing ambition and a belief in their own cleverness. They branched into fake university admissions, offering clients acceptance letters from institutions that existed only on paper. The move promised higher profits and attracted wealthier clients, willing to pay even more for a guaranteed future. But with every new service came new risks. Paperwork multiplied, digital footprints multiplied, and the duo's once simple system became a complex web that required constant attention. Despite their meticulous nature, the expansion made the operation harder to control. Internally, cracks began to show. Rajiv, who had always been the careful planner, grew increasingly overconfident. He boasted to Priya about the flawless nature of their documents and the sheer scale of their client base. Priya, for her part, was focused on managing the growing workload, ensuring clients were reassured and payments were processed quickly. Yet, beneath their confidence, tension lingered. Each document, each promise made, and each payment accepted, carried enormous risk. One mistake could undo everything they had built, but their ambition blinded them to this reality. At the same time, the Home Office began piecing together a pattern. The employer's report had triggered a minor investigation, and agents began looking for similar irregularities. They did not yet know the size of the operation, but the breadcrumbs were there. Every forged visa, every suspicious university letter, and every financial transaction left a trail. For the first time, the duo's empire was being examined from outside their carefully controlled bubble. What had seemed invisible to authorities now started to shimmer faintly under scrutiny. Rajiv and Priya's overconfidence only worsened the situation. In their minds, the expansion into multiple services created the illusion of legitimacy. They believed that offering everything from work visas to university letters made the scheme more professional, but it actually created more points of vulnerability. Each new document, each new client, and each new payment introduced variables that could be traced. By trying to scale too quickly, they inadvertently increased the chances that one small slip would lead to catastrophic exposure. The atmosphere in their office began to shift subtly. Meetings that once focused on planning and growth now included hurried discussions about how to maintain secrecy. Staff and accomplices were instructed to work faster, to be more careful, and to double-check every detail. Behind the confident smiles and polished presentation, worry had begun to creep in. Even minor mistakes, once shrugged off, now seemed dangerous. And although Rajiv and Priya tried to ignore it, a quiet fear started to take root, that all their careful planning could be undone by something beyond their control. The first crack, caused by one client's visa, was more than a warning. It was a precursor to much larger collapse. What had begun as a small contained fraud was now exposed to external forces that they had never anticipated. Rajiv and Priya still believed they could stay ahead, but every move they made left them more vulnerable. The empire they had built so meticulously, worth £250,000 and dependent on secrecy and trust, was starting to wobble. One misstep could trigger a chain reaction, and the tension that had been quietly building behind closed doors was about to erupt. The stage was set for a slip that would bring everything crashing down. The slip that would destroy Rajiv and Priya's empire came from the smallest, most ordinary of errors. In the rush to handle hundreds of clients, Rajiv used his personal email account to send a batch of forged documents to a new client. At the time, it seemed convenient, harmless even. After all, the emails were professional, the documents convincing, and no one had ever traced anything back to him before. But this minor act of carelessness would become the single thread that unraveled the entire operation. The UK Home Office had recently upgraded its automated monitoring systems. Algorithms scanned incoming and outgoing emails for suspicious patterns, unusual attachments, and known fraudulent templates. When Rajiv's personal email delivered the forged documents, the system flagged it immediately. Investigators now had a direct, unbroken link between the mastermind and the fraudulent activity. A single digital footprint, a personal email address, was all it took to pierce the carefully constructed veil of invisibility. This mistake was compounded by timing. Weeks earlier, investigators had begun scrutinizing financial records connected to Rajiv and Priya's operation. Large sums of money had been flowing through multiple accounts, disguised as business transactions. But patterns were starting to emerge. The £250,000 in client payments, once carefully masked, now aligned suspiciously with the emails flagged by the system. The combination of digital and financial evidence made it impossible for the authorities to ignore. For the first time, Rajiv and Priya's carefully guarded facade showed cracks big enough to expose the entire network. As the investigation quietly gained momentum, Rajiv and Priya remained oblivious. They continued to process documents, reassure clients, and expand services, confident in their sophistication. They did not realize that their digital misstep had triggered a chain reaction. Each client file sent, each payment processed, each forged letter issued became additional evidence for investigators. The very tools they had used to manage and control their empire now worked against them. The slip also had psychological consequences. Rajiv, normally meticulous, began noticing small anomalies, delayed responses from clients, slightly wary messages, and unusual questions about document verification. Yet he dismissed these as minor issues, never suspecting that the authorities were already building a case. Priya, too, remained focused on managing logistics and client relationships, unaware that their empire was quietly collapsing under the weight of one small, avoidable mistake. Behind the scenes, investigators were piecing together a case. Priya, too, remained focused on managing logistics and client relationships, unaware that their empire was quietly collapsing under the weight of one small, avoidable mistake. Behind the scenes, investigators were piecing together a complete picture of the operation. They cross-referenced emails, traced financial transactions, and compared forged documents to official templates. Every forged visa, sponsorship letter, and fake university admission was now evidence. What had once seemed like a complex, untouchable fraud became astonishingly transparent. Rajiv and Priya's obsession with detail had ironically created a roadmap for investigators. Every carefully logged transaction, every organized spreadsheet, and every client record was now a trail leading directly to them. By the time the first overt actions were taken, requests for interviews, preliminary subpoenas, and digital audits, the slip in Rajiv's email account had already doomed the operation. It was no longer a question of if they would be caught, but when. The sense of invincibility that had fueled months of greed and ambition evaporated. The empire they had built, worth £250,000 and painstakingly hidden behind layers of forgery and deceit, was suddenly fragile, vulnerable, and entirely exposed. What had begun as a small administrative convenience, a single email sent from a personal account, set off a chain reaction that neither Rajiv nor Priya could have anticipated. Their meticulously planned, multi-layered fraud, once untouchable, was now in the hands of authorities, unraveling piece by piece. Every document, every client interaction, every payment, and every expansion of the scheme became evidence in a case that would ultimately destroy the empire they had worked so hard to build. One simple mistake, one moment of carelessness, had triggered the beginning of the end. Once Rajiv and Priya's slip with the personal email was discovered, the investigation moved swiftly, though quietly at first. The UK Home Office, working alongside local police, began a meticulous examination of every aspect of their operation. Digital forensics experts combed through emails, files, and computer systems. Bank accounts were scrutinized, revealing patterns in deposits and transfers that had previously gone unnoticed. Every piece of data was connected like puzzle pieces, slowly forming a complete picture of the 200. Investigators uncovered the extent of the network Rajiv and Priya had built. It was larger than anyone had imagined, spanning multiple cities and involving several accomplices who handled document creation, client communications, and financial transactions. Each accomplice had believed they were part of a flawless, well-hidden system, but investigators found that their roles had left behind traces, metadata in documents, timestamps on emails, and transaction records in digital ledgers. Every effort the duo had made to professionalize their fraud had backfired. The complexity of the operation had inadvertently created a roadmap for law enforcement. The authorities also discovered the meticulous records Rajiv and Priya had kept. For each client, there were logs of payments, copies of forged visas, sponsorship letters, and university admissions. There were even notes detailing which officials or employers might review the documents and what arguments could be used to prevent detection. What had been intended as a system to avoid mistakes became the ultimate evidence against them. Each detailed record was another link in the chain, demonstrating not only fraud but premeditation on a scale that left investigators astonished. As the investigation progressed, financial evidence became increasingly damning. Transactions disguised as business payments revealed a clear trail of income that aligned with the fraudulent documents issued. Authorities calculated the total, and the figure was staggering. Over £250,000 had flowed through the operation. It was clear that this was not a small-time scam, but a sophisticated large-scale enterprise that had preyed on vulnerable individuals desperate to secure their place in the UK. Every deposit, transfer, and cash withdrawal became a piece of the puzzle, helping investigators build a case that could withstand intense scrutiny in court. At the same time, investigators began piecing together the human side of the scheme. Clients came forward, recounting how they had been convinced of the documents' legitimacy and how much they had paid. Many expressed relief that the authorities had intervened, unaware of the scope of Rajiv and Priya's fraud. These testimonies added context and weight to the digital and financial evidence, creating a multi-layered case that was nearly impossible for the perpetrators to challenge. The scale and organization of the operation became increasingly clear, and it was evident that no single mistake had caused the unraveling. It was the accumulation of errors, overconfidence, and oversight that had allowed investigators to trace the entire operation from start to finish. By the end of 6 months, authorities had a complete map of the scheme. They could see how documents were created, how clients were recruited, and how money flowed. Every strategy Rajiv and Priya had used to hide their tracks had been accounted for and neutralized. The investigation demonstrated how an operation that had seemed invincible could be dismantled step by step, with patience, precision, and attention to detail. What had started as a simple administrative oversight, the use of a personal email, had triggered a cascade of events. The once thriving £250,000 fraud, which had seemed untouchable, was now entirely exposed. The meticulous work of investigators had revealed every layer, every participant, and every transaction. Rajiv and Priya's empire, built over months of careful planning and deception, was now fragile, transparent, and ready to collapse. The stage was set for the final confrontation that would end their operation and bring them to justice. The collapse of Rajiv and Priya's £250,000 fraud scheme came swiftly once the investigation reached its final stages. On a cold February morning in 2021, police moved in. Their raids were precise, coordinated, and relentless. Officers stormed the East London office, seizing stacks of files, computers, and USB drives, filled with evidence of months of forgery. Simultaneously, homes linked to the operation were searched, and accomplices were arrested, some still unaware of the full scale of what they had been involved in. The atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted quietly but noticeably. Whispers of the arrests spread quickly among clients and local communities. The mastermind, Rajiv Sharma, was found in his office, surrounded by the very documents that had once made him feel untouchable. For years, meticulous planning had made him believe his empire was secure. Now, every file, every spreadsheet, every forged visa and university letter was proof of his downfall. Priya Desai was arrested later that day, at her apartment, a mix of shock and disbelief, evident as she realized that the carefully constructed world they had built was crumbling. What had started as ambition and clever deception now ended in complete exposure. Investigators worked methodically to secure the evidence. They cataloged thousands of documents, traced payments, and documented the roles of each accomplice. The £250,000 in client payments, once dispersed and disguised, was fully accounted for. Authorities also recovered emails, spreadsheets, and even handwritten notes detailing the mechanics of the operation. Ironically, the duo's obsession with organization and detail had provided the investigators with an almost perfect blueprint. Each carefully tracked step that had once protected the fraud now confirmed every charge against them. Court proceedings followed, drawing attention from the media and communities affected by the scheme. During the trial, prosecutors presented a comprehensive account of the fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Client testimonies, financial records, and digital traces painted a picture of a deliberate, calculated operation, designed to exploit vulnerable individuals. The scale of the crime, combined with the meticulous planning that had gone into it, left little room for defense. It was clear that the scheme had been more than a spur-of-the-moment crime. It had been an orchestrated, multi-layered enterprise. Sentencing brought a sense of finality to the case. Rajiv Sharma received 7 years in prison, the court citing both the scale of the fraud and the premeditated nature of the crimes. Priya Desai received a slightly shorter sentence, reflecting her role as the operational manager, but still recognizing her central involvement. Other accomplices received varying sentences based on their participation, from community service to prison terms. The judgment underscored the consequences of greed, deception, and overconfidence. For the victims, the sentences brought relief and a sense of justice, though the financial and emotional impact of the fraud lingered. The story of Rajiv and Priya's operation serves as a cautionary tale. An empire that had appeared flawless, generating £250,000 profits, collapsed due to a single careless act, an email sent from a personal account. It highlighted a simple but enduring truth about crime. No matter how sophisticated, how well hidden, or how carefully executed, one small mistake can unravel everything. The case also demonstrated the importance of vigilance, patience, and attention to detail on the part of investigators who had systematically dismantled what seemed like an untouchable criminal network. In the end, the £250,000 empire built on ambition, deception, and greed was gone. Rajiv and Priya's lives were irrevocably changed, and their scheme was reduced to a story told in court documents, police reports, and news articles. The operation that had once seemed untouchable became a vivid example of how quickly success built on dishonesty can turn into a nightmare. The fall of Rajiv and Priya Sharma remains a chilling reminder. In the world of crime, even the smallest error can lead to complete destruction, leaving ambition and greed exposed for all to see.